Japan is slowly disappearing. By 2050, it will have lost around 25 million people, nearly a quarter of its entire population wiped out in just a single generation. It's a collapse like nothing the world has seen before, quietly eating away at the country from within. In the 1980s, there were about 7 working-age people for everyone over the age of 65. Today, that number is just 2, which means fewer people paying taxes, pensions, and funding all the services that make a country run. For decades, people thought this problem was limited to Japan, or maybe just Asian societies, but this is now spreading to the West. Across Europe, birth rates are dropping, and fast. But unlike Japan, this is happening far faster than anyone could have imagined. Some projections estimate that by 2050, the native EU population could drop 1/3 from 450 to just 300 million. For a country's population to stay constant, each woman needs to have an average of 2.1 children. But when we look at the birth rates across Europe, the results are shocking. Hungary 1.5, Greece 1.3, Spain 1.2. And just like Japan, Europe is beginning to feel the strain. Rural schools across the continent are closing, not because of a lack of funding, but because there aren't enough children to fill classrooms. And in countries like Germany and France, pensions are already swallowing up more than 20% of government budgets. Some countries are already panicking. Italy is giving away houses for €1 in an attempt to bring back life to abandoned towns, and Hungary is offering cash incentives to couples to have more children. Not to mention mass migration policies pursued by nearly every European government. But none of it seems to be enough. So now the continent is left wondering, is it set to suffer the same economic fate as Japan, or is there any chance to escape this looming disaster? It's often said that history doesn't repeat itself, instead it rhymes, and what's unfolding in Europe today is starting to sound eerily familiar. But to really understand what's happening to the continent, we need to rewind about 40 years, not to 80s Paris or Berlin, but to Japan. Back then, Japan's economy looked unstoppable. By 1987, the average Japanese worker was earning more than the average US employee, and by 2010, economists were predicting that Japan would overtake the US as the largest economy in the world. But just as Japan was reaching the true height of its economic powers, a quiet phenomenon was starting to emerge. People simply stopped having kids. Naturally, you may assume as a country becomes more prosperous, people would want to have more children. But in fact, the opposite was taking place. As the economy boomed, more and more people moved to cities, chasing better careers and higher education. But all of this came at a cost. Over the course of the 1980s, the cost of buying a home in Tokyo nearly tripled, and many residents were forced into smaller and smaller living spaces. Houses turned into apartments, which then turned into flat shares. And for many, having kids stopped being an option. Marriage and family were delayed, or in many cases abandoned altogether. Having children became a massive financial burden, and some estimates predicted that it was costing families upwards of $200,000 to raise a single child. Before we look at how this predicts Europe's inevitable decline, a quick word from our sponsor. Let's face it, AI is everywhere, and there's so many AI tools out there that it becomes so expensive to buy them all. But now you don't have to. You can use today's sponsor, ChatLLM by Abacus AI, an all-in-one powerful platform where all top AI models come together in one place. You can get access to ChatGPT o3 Pro, GPT 4.1, Gemini 2.5 Pro, Claude Sonnet 4, DeepSeek, Grok 4, and many more. There's no confusion because Root LLM automatically picks the best model based on your prompt. And it's not just text prompts, you can also generate images and videos with so many different models, all inside one platform. Their Humanize feature also makes your content sound more human and bypass AI detectors. And with simple prompts, you can generate docs, PowerPoints with deep research. They also have a VS Code-based code editor called Code LLM that also comes included. And to top it off, they have Deep Agent, a powerful general agent that can build websites, apps, AI agents, chatbots, and complete research reports. Here's the kicker, all of this for just $10 a month, a way more affordable way than paying for each AI tool individually. Visit chatllm.abacus.ai or click the link in the description to try it now. Now let's get back to the video. By 1989, Japan's fertility rate had dropped to 1.57, well below the 2.1 needed for a stable population. At that rate, it meant just after 3 generations, the population would have shrunk by almost 50%. And just as this was beginning to take hold, Japan was hit by one of the most devastating financial crashes in modern history. In the early 1990s, a massive asset bubble, built up over years of loose monetary policy and speculative real estate investment, finally burst. Overnight, housing values collapsed, and the stock market plunged by over 60% as banks were left drowning in bad debt. Japan entered what would become known as the Lost Decades, a period of long-term economic stagnation that they still haven't managed to escape. For an entire generation, the promise of economic prosperity was replaced with job insecurity, stagnant wages, and rising house prices. And with that, the demographic collapse only got worse. According to the Japanese government's own projections, the country's population, currently around 123 million, is expected to fall to about 75 million by 2100. That's a loss of nearly 50 million people and a decline of 40% in the span of a single century. To put that into perspective, it's like France losing its entire population under the age of 50. You may be wondering how this links to what's happening in Europe. Unfortunately, the reality is the exact factors which caused the collapse in Japan are emerging in Europe today, just far quicker. Housing prices in major cities are soaring. In Berlin, it's risen by almost 70% in the last decade, and in London too. And in some places like Lisbon, it's skyrocketed by over 120%. Today, the average young adult in a big European city pays over 40% of their income to rent. While at the same time, living in cities for young professionals has never been more than a necessity. Over 80% of Europe's GDP is generated in urban areas, and for most young professionals, cities are where the jobs, universities, and career networks are concentrated. All of this combined is creating an economy where having kids is becoming increasingly difficult. So just like Japan a generation earlier, many young people are simply choosing not to. But this isn't just the result of economic pressure. Across much of Europe, marriage rates are collapsing. Not just because of affordability, but because many young people increasingly see marriage as unnecessary or even risky. Growing pessimism about the future, from climate change to fear of wars sparking up, mean people are much more worried about bringing children into the world. Polling found that nearly 40% of young people across Europe today have reconsidered having children due to climate change. And it's not just that people are choosing to have fewer children, many are avoiding relationships altogether. Recent studies revealed that the drop in fertility rates has been in large part due to a dramatic decline in the number of people in long-term relationships. Taken together, all of these factors point towards a looming demographic collapse. In Japan, this effect has been well underway for decades. By 2020, nearly 30% of the Japanese population was over the age of 65, making it one of the oldest societies on Earth. And this has created a serious imbalance, a pressure point in Japan's economy known as the dependency ratio. This measures how many working-age people there are to support the non-working population, mostly children and the elderly. In 1960, Japan had about 11 workers for every retiree, but today that number is closer to 2. As this continues, a smaller and smaller group of people have to shoulder the economic weight of the entire country. Each working person is effectively forced to pay higher and higher taxes, covering more and more pension obligations, and supporting a ballooning healthcare system, all while seeing their own standards of living squeezed. At the same time, rural schools across the country are being permanently closed because there are no children left to teach. And in some prefectures, local governments have even begun giving away land and homes for free just to keep the lights on. Amongst other things, demographic collapse has slowed the Japanese economy to a crawl, and now Europe is likely heading in the same direction. Today, not a single country in the EU has a stable population. In 2023, Italy's fertility rate hit 1.2 children per woman, one of the lowest in the world. And Germany, which used to be the engine of European growth, has been hovering around 1.5. And even France, long considered an outlier thanks to generous family benefits, has slipped below 1.7. Across the EU, this average rate is now 1.46, down from around 2 in the 1980s. And estimates suggest that the native European population could drop to close to 150 million by 2050. At a first glance, this may not seem like the worst thing in the world. After all, Europe has been battling a housing crisis, congested cities, and strained public infrastructure for decades, and fewer people could mean more space, cheaper homes, and less pressure on public services. But that's only half the story, because while a smaller population might ease traffic on housing pressure now, like in Japan, the same issues are emerging. Fewer workers, taxpayers, and consumers to support an aging society. European institutions, which place a high focus on government and welfare spending, simply weren't designed to handle this kind of stress. Take pensions, for example. In the majority of European countries, state pensions are provided through a pay-as-you-go system, meaning the money which pays for people comes directly out of the government budget every year, a little bit like a Ponzi scheme. The average EU citizen is already paying around €5,000 a year just to cover other people's pensions. At the same time, hospitals and elder care facilities are facing severe staff shortages. In some parts of France and Germany, nursing vacancies have risen by over 50% since 2010. And this shortage compounds the problem. More elderly people require care, but there are fewer workers available to provide it. France already tried to ease this crisis by raising its retirement age to help ease it. But doing this and raising it by just 2 years sparked violent protests across the country. And governments are now effectively forced to choose between cutting benefits, raising taxes, or taking on more debt, none of which are attractive options. And given the crisis European governments are heading towards, we've seen many countries pivot instead to a mission of economic growth as the only answer. The idea being that if people become richer, then they may be willing to pay higher taxes to cover the growing cost of pensions. But here's the thing, demographic decline makes the very thing that countries need, growth, nearly impossible to achieve. While technologically advanced, most European countries today still depend heavily on labour to fuel their economy, accounting for around 50% of total economic output. Economic growth doesn't happen by magic. It depends on people producing, spending, and investing. And when the working age population declines, all of that slows down. And already, the European Central Bank has warned that the demographic decline could drag potential growth below 1% by the mid-century. Young people aren't just workers, they're consumers. They buy homes, fill schools, and start families to buy consumer goods. And when there are fewer of them around, demand collapses. Unfortunately, in Europe, this isn't some problem on the horizon. It's already happening. In rural Italy, nearly 1/3 of homes are now sitting empty. And in Portugal, maternity wards are shutting down, not due to a lack of funding, but a lack of mothers. And in some parts of Eastern Europe, depopulation is so severe that villages are slowly being reclaimed by nature. This cycle risks creating a feedback loop. As the cost of living rises and the burden on younger generations increases, fewer of them feel secure enough to start families on their own. And economic pressure reduces fertility, and lower fertility makes the economic pressure even worse. That's the demographic trap, and it's exactly what Europe is finding itself in. In Germany, 1 in 3 women aged 35 to 44 who remain childless cite financial reasons as the key factor. And in Italy, 7 in 10 young adults still live with their parents, not because they want to, but because they simply can't afford to leave. That's exactly how this plays out, not as a crash, but a slow, quiet erosion. Of course, European governments have long been aware of this risk, and many have turned to a quick solution to alleviate the crisis: mass migration. In the short term, it has helped. Migrants helped plug gaps in the workforce, supported public finances, and slowed the pace of demographic decline. But immigration alone may not be enough. In 2022, net immigration into the EU was around 2.5 million people. But to maintain a stable population, experts estimate that this figure would need to double. And that projection doesn't even account for the rising demand for care workers, teachers, engineers, and other skilled professionals that aging societies will increasingly depend on. And even if this was the golden solution, which it isn't, there has already been an enormous political backlash against these policies. Even with much smaller migration levels than would be necessary to keep a stable population. From Italy to Germany to Sweden, far-right parties are quickly gaining ground, fueled in large part by anti-immigration sentiment. In France, immigration has become one of the most polarising issues in national politics, and the UK's Brexit vote was shaped in part by fears over open borders. So what does this all mean for Europe's future? The continent is entering a period of profound demographic change, one that could reshape its economies, social systems, and politics. Europe cannot afford to treat this as a distant problem. The effects of a shrinking population are already beginning to take hold, and without coordinated and forward-looking policies, the pressure will only grow. Supporting families, improving access to childcare, rethinking retirement systems, and investing in innovation and productivity will all be essential if Europe hopes to manage or reverse some of these new trends. Demographic decline doesn't make headlines overnight, but its consequences accumulate over time. And while Europe's future is far from written, the choices made in the coming years will shape it for decades to come.